and bet for the better.
Right, back live with you tonight here on In Focus, and a conversation continues with our guest tonight. Prof, you see what happens in the digital age. I just gave you a whole new name. Tomorrow you will be called Professor William Wasserman. I mean, why not? Professor Herman Wasserman as well as William Bird still with us here tonight. I wanted to talk about this phenomenon, and William Bird has touched on it already. The phenomenon where we have now all voices really being equal and having equal access to the public discourse via technology and technology being able to enable that. How that has impacted on, one, the credibility of the news that we report and not necessarily reflecting outwards now, reflecting on us ourselves as the media and what we have been putting out there. Prof?
Well, I mean, I would certainly firstly question the question of all voices being equal and having equal access. I mean, I think there are still vast disparities in terms of access to data, for instance, access to mobile platforms, social media, and so on. But I think, as you point out, I think the landscape has changed radically. The digital disruption has made a huge brought about huge changes in journalism. I think the challenge here, as you point out, is how to discern between media that can be trusted, that are authoritative voices, and those that are less trusted. And and I think here again, it's so important for established news organizations to be above board and to not make those mistakes, not peddle disinformation. Be accurate, be independent, and increasingly, I think, as audiences try to navigate this new world where there are so many voices, there's such a diversity of information coming at them, that they know who to trust, and that trust is not disappointed.
Yeah, certainly, William. Others have been saying traditional media is acting a little bit precious, wanting to protect their privilege of being the gatekeepers of news and entertainment. It's no longer that way now. We have everybody has a voice, and opinions are no longer formulated the traditional way. Is that a good thing?
Well, it's a good thing to be questioning former established media and the narratives that they put out, because there are sometimes problematic narratives that come out of established and traditional media. I think the key difference, though, is that an entity like Newzroom Africa subscribes to the BCCSA, so that's the Broadcast Complaints Commission of South Africa. There's particular license conditions. It means that if you don't subscribe and adhere to practicing good quality journalism, and part of that means that you have to check things, you have to verify things before you run them on air. There are real consequences to that. In the most dire instance, you can be fined and you can be taken off air. Caster can withdraw, your multi-choice can withdraw their license, their agreement with you. So you can actually be taken off air. So there are very real consequences. There's also a level of accountability. Now, any person or journalist or media house that subscribes to those kinds of values, be they the BCCSA or the Press Council's Code, those kinds of things are entities that allow the public to say, if they do something wrong, which, media get things wrong, there's something that can be done about it. There's a level of accountability, and that's part of democratic process. And that's fundamentally different to someone who starts something, they claim to be news, for example, or putting out accurate information, and they just put out complete nonsense. There's no accountability for it. There's no means of which you can test them or verify those things. And so what this has done, this shift to digital, is that it has opened up a number of new and exciting and different voices and possibilities. But at the same time, it's also introduced and put people who just put out nonsense, put them on an equivalent footing if they've got a reasonable following. And that's a real problem, because the one says we're accountable, we're adhering to these and these standards and ethics, and the other one says I'll just put out nonsense, whatever's there. And it is important for the public to be able to know which of the sources is doing what and who they should trust, so that they can and should be able to find news and information that speaks to them in their area, in their language, to their interests, to their specific interests. For example, if it's business, if it's cultural practice, whatever that may be, you should be able to find that kind of thing. So there's, it's a double-edged sword, the shift to digital. It's certainly opened up huge potential, but at the same time, we're seeing that it also offers, unprecedented threats to media freedom.
Yeah. Prof, in terms of the training, traditional methods of training journalists, has the digital age impacted that, and you find yourself having to come up with relevant ways of training, certainly to close the gap so that journalists know how to behave, especially in the digital age, in terms of their sourcing practices and how coverage is done?
Certainly, I think, the one aspect of digital is that, there's a lot of new bells and whistles, and I think those things are important to master, and I think it's important for journalists entering the job market, for instance, to be able to work across different platforms, utilize different technologies, etc. But I think a huge caveat there, and I think William has touched on this, is the aspect of, remaining true to the fundamental values of journalism. And so some of these values are, ethical values that have to do with, independence, accuracy, truth, all of these things that we've already mentioned. Another aspect, I think, is that digital is also seductive in the sense that it can create lazy journalists. It's much easier now to source information aggregated from the web, copy and paste, tweets, and put it in a news story and say there's a report. And I think the danger of sort of cell phone and desktop journalism is something that we also have to guard against. Again, we coming from the deliberations today where we spoke about community media, the importance of being embedded in communities and the importance of actually going out and speaking to real people and observing what's going on around you. I mean, that is a really fundamental value in journalism that we should guard against the loss of, So I think, as William mentioned, it's a double-edged sword, and there are lots of new wonderful opportunities. And when we train journalists, we certainly want to make sure that they are mastering those. At the same time, we also want to make sure that they understand their context, that they understand the democratic context, for instance, that they know what their role is in society and how to engage with people, power relations between journalists and communities. All these things are really as important, if not maybe more important, than learning to master a new tool or app.
Yeah. What was the conversation, particularly today, as you're putting it, as you were focusing on community journalism in particular? Is journalism still viewed by communities as a service that is being provided to society?
Well, I think the interesting thing about the South African media landscape is that we have this three-tiered system, right? We have a public broadcast, a community broadcast, public media, community media, and commercial media. And I think community media often are not seen as sort of maybe the glamorous sort of big resources, big stories, yet they do really important work and in communities, and we wanted to shine the light on them. Often these community organizations struggle to remain viable, but yet they are providing a vital service in communities that communities cannot get elsewhere sometimes. It's media that's provided in their own language, stories about what happens in their own backyards, their own municipalities, for instance. And so we wanted to ask questions around what is press freedom, investigative journalism, fact-checking. How do these things play out in those community organizations where sometimes the stakes are very high, and the questions that they grapple with are sometimes very different from the sort of things that big newsrooms deal with.
Yeah. William Bird, we're heading to 2024 with a real chance maybe of even seeing coalition governments at provincial, others are saying even at national level, which certainly, I mean, if what we are seeing at local community level is anything to go by, it's going to be a chaotic space. What are the real threats that we need to look out for, or new threats, especially when it comes to reporting?
So I think one of the, less a threat, but more one of the greatest challenges that our media are going to face in 2024 is that this is the first time we're going to have independent candidates. So you're going to have something like several hundred political parties, and you're going to have independent candidates. And broadcasters particularly are going to be faced with how on earth do you give equitable coverage to these things. And what we've seen historically is that media, instead of saying, we're going to adopt this particular process and approach for how we cover them, what is going to constitute an election story, what we've seen is that whichever political party can drum up the most ridiculous or outrageous thing or steer the news agenda in their direction, they tend to get a lot of news coverage. So I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be about how do we realize equitable coverage in the lead up to 2024 and ensure that actually news organizations adopt a particular process for saying what's going to constitute an election story. It can't just be, a political party going into a community and shaking hands and kissing babies. That's not news. It's just electioneering. It's critical, as Prof said right at the start of the interview, that they actually go and ask and explain, what the policy issues are and what on earth is actually going on. Let's ask difficult questions. I think in terms of one of the biggest challenges and threats, obviously, is going to be, because the elections are so contested, is going to definitely be around making sure that the elections take place in a safe and secure environment, that we don't have threats of violence. I think the increase in online harms, the very real threat of mis and disinformation, potentially incitement leading to violence in the run-up to these elections is going to be key.
I appreciate you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming on tonight. That's Professor Herman Wasserman from the Stellenbosch University and William Bird from Media Monitoring Africa. We continue next on In Focus with what's leading in the news. Stay with us.
He's a boy in the bubble, in a sense.
It's the things he does behind the scenes that people don't know about.
He now has to realize the destiny that has awaited him since the day he was born.
A new king, a new era. Join us live for the coronation of King Charles III. Saturday, the 6th of May, new and exclusive on BBC Lifestyle.
My asset. My brain. My voice. Is imagination an asset? My liabilities. Perfectionism.
I don't take no for an answer. I'm a workaholic, Baba.
Future auditor. Architect.
Gajillionaire.
The soccer star in the making.
Using the right moisturizer is important. Nivea Q10 works with your skin to visibly reduce